most final of all punishments, the death penalty has been the strongest form of sentencing enforced by governments throughout history. Although 140 nations have now abolished the practice, 58 still enforce it, including 4 of the world's most populous countries that are home to over 60% of the population. Let's examine the death penalty. The first death sentence in recorded history occurred in ancient Egypt in the 16th century BC, when a member of the nobility was accused of practicing magic. His sentencers, unwilling to get their own hands dirty, ordered the magician to take his own life. Some state leaders have been known to use the death penalty as a means of political oppression. During the reign of Henry VIII, it's estimated that 72,000 people were executed, not to mention a couple of his own wives. During World War II under Stalin, the Soviets executed 158,000 of their own soldiers as an ironic punishment for desertion. The illustrious and widely celebrated leader of the Free Chinese People, Chairman Mao, was a massive fan of capital punishment to quieten opposition. During the Cultural Revolution, he is said to have sentenced at least 46,000 scholars to be buried alive. The English legal system during the 17th to early 19th century is known as the Bloody Code, as there were a staggering 222 crimes punishable by death. As well as adults, children as young as 7 could be hanged if they demonstrated strong evidence of malice. During this period, 10,000 people were executed, including 14-year-old John Amy Bird Bell, who after being hanged was further punished by being publicly dissected by surgeons. Nowadays, only adults are at the mercy of the firing squad. International law prohibits giving the death penalty to those who were under 18 at the time of the crime. Despite this, in the last 5 years, Iran, Saudi Arabia and Sudan have carried out juvenile executions. 90% of all executions take place in Asia, and China's execution rates exceed the rest of the world's combined. In 2012, China's government executed more than 3,000 people. In comparison, the USA executed 42 people. It shouldn't be surprising then that Chinese law has an enormous 55 offences that are punishable by death, including economic crimes such as accepting bribes. In Europe, the only country that still has the death penalty is Belarus. In the USA, 32 states still practice the death penalty, and as of January 2014, the country has 3,070 inmates patiently waiting on death row, but an estimated 4.1% of them are innocent. Although it's illegal in America to execute someone with intellectual disabilities, the state of Texas recently executed Marvin Wilson, who had an IQ of just 61. They justified this decision by creating the Briseno factor, their own set of guidelines to determine learning difficulties based on John Steinbeck's character Lenny Small from his novel Of Mice and Men. There are currently 0 laws in the USA to protect those with mental illness from being executed, unless they can somehow prove they were insane during the crime. How people are executed has varied throughout cultures and history, from the guillotine to gas chambers. In the USA, lethal injection is the primary method of execution. Due to a Europe-led sales ban on traditional drugs, American states are now using untested combinations of lethal injections, leading to botched executions, such as that of Joseph Wood in 2014. Wood reportedly gasped for breath 660 times after being injected 15 times with execution drugs. It took almost 2 hours for him to die in a procedure which should take 10 minutes. Despite the horrific finality of the death penalty, 88% of criminologists don't believe it's an effective deterrent to crime.
If we are going to answer difficult and profound questions as the President told us to, the toughest one is probably, if someone is guilty of committing a horrible crime and the family of the victim want the perpetrator executed, do we want to live in the kind of country that gives that to them? I would say no. You might very reasonably say yes, or at the very least, But it's a question that is going to need an answer.
What does the United States have in common with Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia? The answer is the death penalty. According to Amnesty International, those four nations and China are responsible for 82% of the world's executions.
Look, this is going to seem like a gross simplification, but any list that contains Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia and China is not a list you want to be on. Ideally, you want to be on one of those lists that Finland is on.